So why might a business prefer to be smaller than larger? Right? What advantages might there be? Have a go. 30 seconds. Good idea, Kane. Yes, that would be true. Very good, Nishan. Well done. Yes, you're right, Harshna. That's absolutely right. That's a really good point, Emma. Well done. Yeah. So you guys are rock stars. Keep going. See if the rest of you can put a thought or two in. Just wondering if Lancelot or Emma, if you know the average height of an NBA player. Any ideas?
6 foot.
A little bit more than 6 foot. Not much more. A little bit more. What do you think? By the way, in case you're wondering, Steph Curry, who you are quite familiar with, is pretty much exactly average height in the NBA. So how tall is Steph Curry? Got a really awesome book at home about Steph Curry growing up. My son, it's a children's book, it's a cartoon, and it talks all about Steph Curry as a child growing up, wanting to play in the NBA, and everybody telling him he was too small, right, to do that, and him working hard and developing skills and all of those sorts of things. And eventually he grew, and eventually he ended up in the NBA, right, and has become the phenomenon that he is. However, 6'2" is approximately the height that I was aiming for there from you. But Kevin Durant's not 6'2". Shaquille O'Neal, he wasn't 6'2". So therefore, why is Steph Curry so good comparatively to some of those really big players? So what advantage would he have playing that the bigger players may not have as an advantage? Good idea, Lancelot. Hadn't thought of that one. Well done, Eugene. Yes, that looks a little bit suspiciously like a Dr. Google answer, but that's a good answer. Yep. The idea is that the smaller basketball players are faster, potentially, assuming. They're more nimble, right? They're able to read and react a bit quicker. Now, I know basketball in the NBA in particular is what's called positionless these days, but essentially that means that there should be no real advantage that the smaller player has or doesn't have that can't be made up for in some way, right? So the idea with businesses is that the smaller the size of the businesses, just as you've said, they've got less cost. Yes, they do. They've potentially got fewer workers, so less labor costs. Yeah, it might be easier to manage. One or two of you talked about how it could be easier to manage the businesses. Again, the same sort of idea. that you don't have this vast multinational business, so you're just managing that small one. It might be that you're able to read and react to your customers a little bit quicker, the demand that they have. And I like the comment, someone made the comment about personalization of the service that you have. Because you've only got a few customers as opposed to millions, you're able to personalize your service. You're able to really know your customers. And some of you might have had that experience where because you're a regular with a particular shop, they know you. And they're, hey, how you going? Oh, yeah. That kind of service. Whereas if you're one of a million people, as was said, right, as a customer, they may not know you personally and they may not be particularly happy with you. I give you an example. A long, long time ago, back in a galaxy far, far away, in New Zealand, this is like, we're talking decades ago, we had this technology, you might be familiar with it. They were called VHS tapes and videotapes, and they eventually morphed and changed into something called DVDs, or digital versatile discs, right? Now, in New Zealand, because we were at the bottom end of the world, okay, to actually get those discs and tapes back then, looking a long time ago, it was really difficult and expensive, okay? Because to get them there, because it's a small market, at the bottom end of the world, they had to come on a boat, and they would come on a boat from Australia usually, and they had to wait. They literally used to wait for months in order to fill the containers in order for them to come over. So it would take us a long, long time. So the movie had been out for years, and then eventually we would get the DVD that you're probably more familiar with than a VHS. Yeah? And it would mean that the cost of those DVDs, the cost of the VHS tapes was really quite high. For give you an example, a new release, right? You would be paying in New Zealand for one of those sort of blockbuster films, you would have been paying 50 New Zealand dollars for it. Now, that was back then. Okay, so if you were to, if that was the price now, and you were to multiply that by 4, that would get you ringgit price here. That's a lot of money. Yeah? And that was way back then. So it was even more money, right? All those decades ago. Yeah? But what I discovered in my discovering this is that there was a company in Belfast, Ireland that produced DVDs, okay? And what they were able to do was to ship the DVDs to me, okay, in New Zealand, all the way from Belfast and Ireland, yeah? And they packaged them and they sent them through the post, just as like normal mail, yeah? And what ended up happening is it was actually cheaper, and I know this is going to sound strange to you, but it's actually cheaper for me to buy. It was cheaper for me to buy a DVD and from Belfast, Ireland, and have it shipped all the way to New Zealand than it was for me to walk to the shop in New Zealand and buy the DVD there on the shelf. Right? Because they were only dealing with me, they needed just a small package, send it out, and they were able to very quickly respond because back then the internet had started and emails were happening, right? And they were able to buy, I was able to buy DVDs that I couldn't buy in New Zealand and get all sorts of things and get them shipped to me, right? And every time they sent you a VHS back in the old days and a DVD in the slightly newer days, they'd actually send you, believe it or not, with it, a little wee card, like a thank you note that's with your name on it, handwritten, with your name on it, thank you for shopping with us, you know, and somebody's name and signature. And I used to see that and think, oh, wow, that was amazing. And so I regularly bought from them because I thought that was a really good service. One DVD came through and it had a scratch on it, didn't work. So I emailed them back and said, what do I do with this? And they said, pretty much straight away, they said, we will credit your account. And they sent me a replacement DVD that same day. So the service, they were able to read and react really quickly. It wasn't a big business, and they very quickly worked out how to make my needs or how to meet my needs as a customer. So yeah, maybe being smaller is an advantage sometimes in sport, right? But also perhaps in business. Well done, team. Now, this is going to connect to, by way of that worksheet that you did the other day. Okay? When we're talking about business economics, two things to consider is that we have costs and we're going to have revenues. And we're going to use those to try and work out the levels of profit that a business is able to make. So when we're talking costs, the two types of costs that we talk about are ones that are fixed. They're fixed costs. The other types are going to be variable. Now, if they're fixed, all that means is that those costs don't change regardless of the level of output. So you can be making one item, 100 items, 1,000 items, 1,000,000 items, doesn't matter. The fixed costs don't change. So, they're ones that don't change regardless of the level of output. So what costs within a business do you think don't change? What do you think? Doesn't matter how many items you produce, those costs don't change. Anybody live in a house? What happens every month in a house? If you don't own the house. What does mum and dad have to pay?
Gotta pay rent.
Now, typically rent is a contract, so therefore it doesn't change. Doesn't matter how many people are in the house, they'll have to pay the rent. Yeah. So you can have one person in the house, 10 people in the house, 20 people in the house. It really doesn't matter. You have to pay that amount of rent. So businesses rent buildings quite often. Factories, they will rent warehouses. There will be a huge amount of their costs that will be rental costs. They don't change. Right? It might be that they've even borrowed money from a bank and they have to then repay that with interest. Now, the interest cost, you can sort of look at that and suggest that they're paying a fixed amount back based on the interest, maybe, and that could be a fixed cost. Yeah. So rental will be a big one because a lot of businesses will rent the property that they're in. Yeah. So, for example, here I am, and you will be next week at the school. Yeah. Well, the school doesn't technically own the buildings. Okay? It's rented. Not only that, but the buildings themselves and the ground that the buildings sit on, they're owned by two different companies. Yeah? So they're also kind of renting the ground as well. All right? So when you come to school, as you will be, okay, the boarding house is owned by the school. Right? That building is actually owned by the school. The school built it. Yeah? But the land the boarding house sits on isn't. So that bit is also rented. So businesses have to pay those sorts of costs. And it doesn't matter. So for the school here, it doesn't matter how many learners are in school. So, I mean, look, there's, you know, look, there's my classroom. Nobody's here. Oh, hope you didn't get seasick with that. All right? Nobody's here. But I'm here. And that's important too. But it doesn't matter who's here. It doesn't matter if I've got one child in my class or if I've got 20, 30. They still have to pay the same rent. Yeah? Doesn't matter whether your factory is producing one product or producing 1,000, you still have to pay the rental as contracted on that factory or warehouse, whatever it is that you're renting. Yeah? So those would be fixed costs. But the variable costs, the word variable means changing, yeah? So variable costs are going to be ones that change, they do change, depending on the level of output you're producing. So a lot of things that we are manufacturing and selling, okay, they're made up of a whole lot of different resources. So that costs. So those resources, okay, whether they are, you know, aluminium, right, or whether they are the ingredients that go into a hamburger for McDonald's, that changes. That cost will change dependent on how many products they produce. Electricity costs, right? You can turn on and off the light switches, and dependent on how many buildings you need open and on, the light switches, the electricity cost will vary. Similarly, I guess, with aircon, maybe. Similarly with, some other costs that will vary, like the actual wage cost itself of your labor. If you've got one staff member, as you correctly pointed out, because you're a small business, it costs you less than if you've got 100, right? Bigger wage bill. Right? That varies dependent on how many workers you need, which varies dependent on your output, the level of output you produce. Right, so what I want you to do now is to be able to explain the difference between fixed costs and variable costs. But I'm going to give you a literal 30 seconds, not Mr. David's weird 30-second time, an actual 30 seconds. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to push start. It'll give you a countdown, and then you need to write in your answer. What is the difference between fixed costs and variable costs? That's going to be the question. So I'm going to push start. We go 3, 2, 1, go. Writing your answers. Come on, guys, quickly. Got 27 seconds left. What's the difference between fixed and variable costs? Got to put a bit of pressure on. How fast can you get the answers in? Come on, only 16 seconds. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, here we go, 1, 0. Wow. Tell you, put the pressure on you, yeah? Now, in your exam, you're going to have timed conditions. In your exam, dependent on the type of question you're answering, you're going to have a period of time in which to answer that question, right? Typically for paper 2, we say you have 1.5 minutes per mark. So if it's a 2-mark question, 3 minutes, yeah? That is how long you'd have, right? If it's a 4-mark question, you'd have 6 minutes to answer, yeah? So this, potentially, could be a 2-mark question, maybe. Might even be 4-mark question, potentially. There is a bit of lag on the internet, I'm noticing. I'm sorry, it appears that the connection is a bit slower, so I apologize if I am lagging up a bit. All right, let's see how we got on. Variable costs depend on the level of output. Fixed costs do not change regardless. Good. Well done, Abu. Very good. Emma, fixed costs stay the same. Yes, variable costs change. Well done. Kane, fixed costs don't change, variable costs change. Yes, excellent. Good team, well done. Now, here's an approach to it, all right? Now, we've talked about businesses and the costs, but if we take one specific cost, so the labor cost within a business, and we break that down a bit. We know about wages because we learned about them. That's the income earned per hour. Okay. We also learned about the idea of salary. This is going back a little bit, where we talked to that the salary was an income that you earned, but it was like a year's worth of income, and then they broke it up and paid it to you in chunks, like say every month, for example. Yeah. Wage versus salary. So wages, therefore, are a variable cost because they change based on the number of hours you're working. Right? So if you're the worker in McDonald's and you're working 8 hours, that's how much you get paid. But then all of a sudden you're needed to work 10 hours, so you get paid more. So wages will be a variable cost, but salaries, because that's a fixed amount that you get every month, say, that's a fixed cost for a business. So it's a bit of a trap for young players when they get asked about wages and salaries to work out which one is fixed and which one is variable. Oh no, graphs. Ah! All right. Sorry, got excited by the giraffes appearing. All right. So let's have a look at some giraffes. Here we go. Here they are. This one is your fixed costs. If you were to add all of your fixed costs together into a bundle and say this is the total amount of my fixed costs, what would that look like? Well, as we've said, your fixed costs are fixed. They don't change regardless of the level of output. So your output increases, but your fixed costs don't change. So your total of your fixed costs is going to be a perfectly elastic, straight, horizontal line. That's it. At whatever the level of fixed costs is. So graphically, done. All you have to do to be able to reproduce the graph is to know what the fixed costs are, what the value is, and then it's fixed. It doesn't change. These ones, however, are variable, so they are going to change. We tend to assume that they increase as your output increases, right? It costs you more. You need more resources, you need more labor. It's going to cost you more to produce more goods. Yeah, right? So therefore, your total variable cost is increasing as your output increases. All right? And graphically, like a rocket ship. Now, we could add those two together. You could add your fixed costs and your variable costs together, and that would create a total amount of costs, or total costs. Yeah? And if we did that, it's going to look slightly different, but very similar. All right? I'm trying to work out where the duster went. Here it is. Now, if we were to add these two together, so fixed cost plus variable cost equaling total cost, then it would be very similar, but it would start here. Right? That would be your first cost. Rather than 0, your first cost would be 10,000 because that's your fixed cost. And then it would go up TC or total cost. Just, codify it a bit. Put a little bit of a code there to help you remember. Right? So you don't always have to write total cost. Yeah? TC. All right. Right, what would we call the total cost of all production? Well, we call them our total cost. Next one is cost per unit. Now, again, this is connected to the worksheet you did the other day. Right? So this is cost per unit. So if we were then to take our total cost and we needed to work out a per unit amount of cost, well, we need to know how many units we're producing. All right. So if our total cost is 100, add them up, 100, and we're making 10 units, what is the cost per unit? Anybody know? How would you work it out? If the number of units we're making is 10, so that's the quantity we've produced, 10 units, the total cost is 100, how would you work out cost per unit? What do you think? Cost per unit. Cost per unit. So therefore it'll be cost per unit. So therefore it will be So what we've actually calculated is the average of our total cost. Average of our total cost, or our cost per unit. So our average cost is $10 in this particular case, right? So we would classify that as average cost, or AC, right? Which, if you're a music fan, is immediately followed by DC. No? No, no, no. All right. Now, get rid of that. So that was how you work out your total costs, right? So if you had total costs, then you would have your total of your fixed costs plus the total of your variable costs. You'd add them together and you'd get your total cost. But what would happen if the examiner gave you your total costs and your fixed costs, and you had to then work out total variable?
Wouldn't you just minus total cost by the total fixed cost to get the
Yes, you would.
total variable cost?
Now, you're all mathematicians, so this is going to be easy for you, right? But yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. So total cost minus total variable cost is going to be total fixed cost. Absolutely right. Yeah. So the examiner could, in your multiple choice section particularly, give you like a little table with the costs in it. And then it might be that they're asking you to work out, complete the table basically, and work out what the average costs are, right, for that particular table. Now, if it's multiple choice, they're going to give you the answer. It will be one of obviously four. Yeah. So that kind of helps a bit with the maths, but you'll still need to know the equations. You'll still need to know what or how to actually do the calculations. Yeah. Now, we don't give you like a formula sheet. When you go in the exam, here's your formula sheet. These are all the ones you need. Don't do that. You just have to have them stored in your mental filing cabinet. Okay? And just pull them out. Okay? Right. Now, oh look, there's another giraffe. What's happened there? We've plotted the average of our total cost. Right, so we had total cost divided by quantity. That equaled the average of our total cost. And then when we tried to plot it, whoo, well, that's what happened. Right, so from 0 to here, average cost is falling. From here to here, average cost is actually increasing. And that's how you would explain that curve. What does the curve look like? What do you think? What do you think it looks like? The other class thought it looked like a smile. Maybe. How about this? What letter of the alphabet does it look like? What letter? Z? C? Maybe if you're standing on your head, it might look like a C. But what if you aren't standing on your head? What letter would it look like then? Yeah! Well, it doesn't look like me. It looks like you. right? That looks like the letter U. Now, the reason why I'm saying that is because if you're reading books about economics, sometimes they will talk about the average cost curve, and they will describe it as a U-shaped curve. That's what they mean. They mean it looks like the letter U. I know, kind of a flat U, but U, yeah? Like a little bowl that you put salad in. The salad bowl curve, right? And some textbooks, like the IB one, will talk about the U-shaped curve, yeah? Now, this bit here is going to be quite important. This bit here is going to be quite important because they're the ones that give it the shape, yeah? Average costs falling here, average costs rising here. That gives it that U shape, okay? What we say here is we're having something occurring here, and it's called economies of scale. So as output is increasing here, there's increase in output. All right? Output's increasing, average costs are falling. That is called, in economics, economies of scale, because your scale is increasing. Right? The amount of output you're producing is increasing and your average costs are falling. We call that economies. Now, we use the word economy, and I know it's difficult because we're doing economics and we're talking economies. The thing about economies, like you would if you're on an aeroplane and you've got the economy seat. Yeah, it's the discounting, it's the less expensive, right? You're getting a budget deal, you're getting a deal, right? This idea of economies of scale is where you are able to gain, right, simply because gain with a reduction in costs because you're increasing your output. Yeah? So I don't know if you've seen that before, right? And there are some amazing videos and stuff that we can show you where it kind of happens, right? And we used to do an experiment in class, and when we're all back, we can think about it, but have to be socially distanced and all of those sorts of things, right? But we used to do experiments where you actually prove this, where you're increasing output, but your costs are falling. And the reason why they're falling is because you are getting better at doing the job, right? You're increasing your inputs, and as you increase your input, you're increasing the output. So the ratio of increased output to increased input sort of idea, right? Because you're increasing your output, you are more able to achieve all sorts of different things. So say, for example, let's take an example of a business, right? You might have heard of this one, Coca-Cola. Maybe you've heard of it, yeah? Let's imagine Coca-Cola wants to do an advert in the Ukraine. That would be quite expensive to do, I would think. Get all the people, fly them all over. They can easily do it, right? This is a company that's got a marketing budget for one of their brand of products of $6 billion US. They can well afford to do marketing somewhere around the world, anywhere they want. They can afford to hire famous people to be in their adverts. How can they do that? Well, because they are that big. They make that many sales. Whereas the street vendor down the road, you're going to guess he can't do that because he doesn't have that scale, that size. Right? You know, some businesses like, say the school here was to go to Apple and say, we would like to buy more Apple Macs. Can you provide us with these computers? How many would you like to buy? Well, because of the size of the school, we might need to buy 20 or 30 or 40 or 50 or 100. And Apple says, woohoo, yeah, tell you what, if you do buy them from us, we'll give you a special deal. But if you individually were to go to Apple and say, I'd like a deal, please, on the computer, they might turn you away because you're buying one. More likely to give you a special deal if you're buying more. Yeah. This one, though, says something goes wrong here. You've still got the increase in output, but your average costs are no longer falling, they're rising. So that we actually give a different name. And we're going to call it diseconomies of scale, which isn't the Jamaican version of economies of scale. No. It's not. Really not. Okay? That's one of two Jamaican jokes I have. Yeah. The other ones. Have I told you that one? Oh, internet has frozen. No, it's back again. All right. The other joke was when you come back from a holiday and they ask you, where did you go? Where did you and your wife go for your holiday? And you say the Caribbean. And they will say Jamaica. And then you reply with, no, she came willingly. No. Okay, we'll let that one stew. Yeah, you can laugh later at that joke. It's a good joke. Now, diseconomies of scale, yeah, that's the opposite here. So you've got declining average costs, you've got increasing average costs here, yeah? And what's happening is almost the reverse of what was happening. Because we've got a fixed factory, right, you've got everybody now pushing and shoving, trying to get to the machine to make your product. So I don't know I don't know how many computers you've got at home, but what happens if everybody wants to use it at the same time? Yeah? Yeah? Sometimes when businesses grow, it means that the workers are potentially going to get in each other's way. Those efficiency gains that they make here are going to not happen here because they're keeping employing more and more workers, right? Output increases, but it costs them more because those additional workers aren't producing those extra benefits for them that they were previously, right? So previously, an additional worker might gain 10 more units. Now, an additional worker, because they're not quite as skilled and they're getting in everybody's way, can only produce 8 more units. And then the next one only 6, and the next one only 5. So in order to get those gains of output, you need to hire more and more workers. Yeah? Whoa, right? So therefore, to get that increase in output, your costs are going to rise because you're needing to hire more and more workers in order to achieve those increases in output that you were before. So that's a diseconomy of scale. Yeah? Economies of scale is when you're increasing output and your costs are falling. You know, if McDonald's wanted to borrow $1 million from the bank, done. Yeah, and the reason why they're able to do that is because they're a big company. If you wanted to go and borrow $1 million from the bank, there'd probably be a few questions. Yeah, but McDonald's, yeah, here you go, have $1 million, have $2 million, have 5. Yeah, matter, right? Because they know they'll pay them back. So they can gain all sorts of economies of scale just because of their size. It could be because they're bigger, they're able to employ amazing managers who can look after different divisions within the business. Whereas when they were smaller, they had one person who had to try and look after everything. Yeah? So maybe that helps. All right. Economies and diseconomies of scale, and they cause the average cost curve to end up being U-shaped. Now, when you get to IB, you're going to delve into that in a bit more. So when you're doing IB economics, a little bit more to that. But at this point, that's a good understanding that you've got. Now, so this was part with regard paired with your worksheet. So what is total costs, fixed costs, variable costs? What does it look like? Average costs, what would it look like as a graph? Now, point number 4, though, says average of fixed costs. So we had our total fixed costs, all right? Okay, we had the total fixed costs, and we said, okay, we want to, well, apologies, we want to work out average of our fixed costs. So take our total and we divide it by quantity. That gives us an average, all right? In essence, what we're doing is we're working out the fixed costs per unit, just as we were before working out the total costs per unit. Now we're just working out the fixed cost per unit and average fixed costs. And if you were to plot that, if you were to turn it into a giraffe, it's going to be weird because it's going to start quite high because they're fixed costs. So whatever that cost is, 10,000, right? Here it is. All right, fixed costs. $10. There's your output. But what's going to happen is that as you spread those fixed costs over your output, those averages are actually going to decline. They're going to decrease. And it's going to get closer and closer and closer and closer and closer and closer to zero. It's not going to touch zero. Now, there is maths in that. It's not economics, it's maths. Yeah? Right? Because it's an average, the way it's a fixed number, and then you divide it by the quantities. Yeah? So 10,000 divided by 1 is 10,000. 10,000 divided by 2 halves it. 10,000 divided by 3 and so on. And it just keeps getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. Yeah? But it never hits zero. And there's a maths word, is it asymptotal, something along those sort of lines. That means it will never hit the axis. Yeah. There's another maths word to describe the shape here. And I think, and I'm not a maths teacher, but I believe that it is a rectangular hyperbola. Ooh, fancy words. Yeah? So the average costs are spread over a greater amount of output, which causes that shape. Kind of like a really steep slide that goes whoosh all the way down. All right. Now the average of the variable costs, all right, so if we take the average of the variable costs, so ABC, then we need to take the total of the variable costs, and again, because it's an average, we're going to divide it by the quantity. All right, in this case, it's the variable costs per unit. And how does that look as a graph? Well, quite familiar. It's going to look U-shaped, has to, all right? Right, because we're taking the fixed costs out, so the only thing that's left is the variable costs, and we know that the total average cost curve is U-shaped, so therefore that has to be U-shaped as well. Okay. All right. Now it's not going to be exactly the same as the average cost curve, because the average cost curve also takes into account the average fixed costs. I know that's quite a lot for you to take on board. Right. I apologise for that. Hopefully that helps with your worksheet that you did the other day. Right. Now, move on. Woo. Right, move on. Woo. Here's what we're going to do. We're going to make an enormous assumption, and our assumption is going to be that businesses are in business to maximise their profits. Now, we know they're not all in that for that. Okay? We know that. But let's just, for this point in time, imagine that they are. And we're talking about profit maximization, which transformers, maximize, right? No. So, we're wanting to maximize the profits because we're wanting to make maximum. We're wanting to make the most we possibly can. Yeah. If a business makes $1 of profit, well, okay, but maybe that's the maximum it could have made. What if it makes $100? Maybe that's the most it can possibly have made. Whatever that maximum level is, that becomes the goal. And then obviously next year you want to try and push that maximum out. Now, if the firm is competitive. And when we say competitive, we're actually going to talk about what's called perfect competition. And I know you're probably thinking about, you know, your significant other in your life and saying, oh, they're perfect, yeah. Right. But in this particular context, all that we're saying is that there is no way that you can distinguish the different products. Okay, they're effectively the same product but different companies. So if you've been to like those market stalls where there's like wet markets, where there might be stall after stall after stall after stall, and they're all selling exactly the same product. Chinatown is an example where it's just row upon row upon row of businesses, sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes all selling exactly the same product. They're all competing with each other, but because they're selling exactly the same product, they have no influence over the price. They can't change the price, right? Because if they were to increase their price to try and maximize their profits, all of a sudden there'd be a difference between their firm and another firm, and customers would just go to the cheaper firm. Yeah. If one firm decided to decrease their price, all the customers would go there, so this firm would say, well, I need to decrease my price as well. And so therefore there'd be no difference again. So effectively, there is no way they can change their price at all. So if they can't change their price, if we were to map it out, right, price in dollars, quantity, right, they can't change the price. So the price is going to be fixed. So the price is going to be whatever that price is, and it's just going to be like that. That is their price. Doesn't matter how many products they sell, they have to sell at that price. That is under the condition of a perfectly competitive firm. Now, the next part of this talks about revenue, because that's the other side of the coin. And when we talked about goals of a business, when we talked about the size of a business, we talked about revenue, we talked about sales turnover. We talked about how much they're able to make from their sales. So if we're talking about revenue, so TR, total revenue, then what we're describing is how much they're able to earn from their sales. So they take the price of the product and you're going to multiply it by the quantity sold. Right? Internet. All right? TR equals P times Q. Total revenue equals price times quantity. That gets them their total revenue. But maybe because that might be their goal, right? That may tell you their size of their business. But what about their revenue per unit? Yeah? So that they can work out how much they're going to receive for each unit they sell. Well, it's going to be an average. So total revenue divided by quantity equals what?
ATR.
Yes, average total revenue. Yeah. Well, what else does it equal?
Per unit.
Yeah, it's the amount of revenue per unit. But if we have a look at this equation here, TR equals P times Q. This equation says TR divided by Q. So therefore, your average revenue also equals what?
I'm not sure.
Well, mathematicians, what does it equal? So much maths. Really close, Emma. All right, P times Q gave you TR. So if you took TR and divided it by Q, what's left?
Oh, you'll get price?
Yes. Price. Which again makes sense to what we experience. We go into a shop and we look at the price of it. And that for a business is how much they are able to earn for that unit. That is its average revenue. So when we had this here, what we could actually do is we could actually label that average revenue, just because we could. Why not? Yeah. Now again, when we do this, look at this in IB economics, there's a bit more to this. We're going to be able to expand on this idea. We're going to be able to create some magic from that. Okay. All right, now is there any limit to what your total revenue could look like? Well, no, because it's dependent on your sales. So total revenue, let's price them in dollars. There's your output. All right. Might have to sell 1 unit to get output. So total revenue. Yeah. More you sell, increase quantity sold, increase total revenue. Just like that. But we had another curve just before. We had a cost one, didn't we? We had total costs. Oh, that's exciting. Could we put that in there too? Let's see. Total revenue and costs. Now, total costs started high because they had the fixed costs. So, yeah. Total cost. Look at that. Isn't that amazing? Just like that. And you can graphically illustrate the idea of total revenues and total costs. And that's going to be quite important because what we're going to discover is if we're trying to work out the profits to maximize them, we're going to have to take the revenues that we earn, the incomes that we earn from sales, and we're going to have to take away, subtract the costs that it costs us to make the product. So we're going to be doing total revenue minus total cost is equal to profit. And then all we're going to have to do is to say, well, all we want is for that gap between these two lines to be the biggest it can possibly be. Yeah? And I mean, it's business. It makes sense. Yeah? In order to increase your revenue, you're either going to have to increase your price or increase your sales. Yeah? You could look at decreasing your costs. And then the gap between those two curves would widen, and therefore you'd earn more profit. But that's taking it 3 or 4 steps. It's a bit fun. All right. Gosh, you're doing some good work today. Look at all of that. Fantastic. All right, now. All right. Very last thing for the day, and then you can have a mental break because it's important to have a mental break and not a breakdown. All right. Now, we've said already that we can have profit maximization as the main goal for a business. But it doesn't have to be the only goal that a business has. Businesses can have more than one goal. It could be that they have an alternative goal and not profit maximization. Right? That might be, maybe their alternative goal might be it's about sales. They might be trying to maximize the amount of sales that they make because that actually might lead to performance pay for the managers, right? You remember we talked about different types of pay, and one of those payments was a performance pay. And you got paid more if you made more sales. So therefore, maximizing the number of sales that you make will lead to the business maximizing its revenue. So maybe that's their goal, right? Maximizing profit, we talked about. It could be, how about this one? An alternative goal might be about the environment, right? Instead of thinking about profits and revenues, maybe the business is set up because they're worried about the environment and environmental concerns, and it's about, that's what the business is about. So it's trying to reduce the level of pollution, or it's trying to save the one the other day that was saving elephants, came through, charity that they're doing about saving elephants. Yeah. Or it could be that one. Maybe they've got a goal where their goal is to be socially responsible. Now, what we mean by that is it might be that we're not interested in the profits as such. We're more interested in employing the most number of people we can. Maybe there's a lot of unemployment, I don't know, but maybe that's our goal. Or maybe our goal is to be able to pay people, give them a wage, a salary that is a lot, as much as we can possibly give them. That might be our goal. Now, in New Zealand, when we talk about business, we talk about like a three-legged stool or a three-legged chair, and we'd say that quite often businesses will have more than one goal or more than one objective to their business. And it might be that profit maximization is their number one leg of the chair, but it might be that they have other goals as well. So quite important to realize all of that. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to finish up there, right, for the day. Now, if you haven't yet finished that worksheet about costs and revenues, work on that. Add to your notes based on what we've looked at today. I'll upload the video once it is finished all processing and then share the link with you. Otherwise, as we'd say in the land of my birth, hei konera, which means goodbye for now. Right? Have a bit of a break, have some food, have a bit of a run round. All right? Charge around the house. Don't annoy your family. Okay? Do something a bit physical. Stay away from the screen. Right? Because obviously you've got another lesson after lunch. All right? See you.
Thank you, Mr. David.
See you.
Bye-bye.
Have a great day.